Okay, so you want to own a private jet. Skip security, skip the middle seat. Land 20 minutes from the meeting instead of 2 hours from it. But here's the part nobody tells you at the sales demo. The jet that saves you time is also the only asset in the world where the government will let you write off the entire purchase price the same year you buy it. And the same asset that quietly bankrupted 3 of America's most famous CEOs the same week they asked taxpayers for a loan. By the end of this video, you'll know what a jet actually costs beyond the sticker. The tax mechanism that makes owning one almost irrational not to consider if you already run a real business, and the exact reason most billionaires who could buy one in cash choose not to. Start at the bottom. A used, decade-old very light jet, something like an early Citation Mustang, runs about $2 million. Step up and a pre-owned Bombardier Global 6000, the one intercontinental buyers actually fly, listed in the UAE this year for around $21 million. Go further and a new Gulfstream G700 lists at $75 to $81 million, with buyers routinely waiting years for a delivery slot. That same $80 million, left in an index fund instead, would have compounded quietly for decades while the jet lost value the moment it left the factory. And here's the line that makes the price tag feel small. None of those numbers are the real cost of the jet. They're just the deposit. Because the jet is just the start. Annual operating costs on a mid-size aircraft run $1 to $2 million a year, whether you fly it or not. Insurance alone runs 1 to 3% of hull value. So on a $20 million jet, that's $200,000 a year just to be allowed to fly it. Hangar space in a major city can top $200,000 annually. And here's the one buyers never budget for: the crew. 2 pilots at $200,000 to $300,000 each, a scheduler, a dispatcher, mechanics on retainer, sometimes a flight attendant. Call it $600,000 a year in salaries before the plane has burned a gallon of fuel. Add fuel, maintenance reserves, and a major inspection that can run $500,000 on its own. And a well-used mid-size jet can burn through $4,000 to $5,000 an hour just sitting on the tarmac waiting for you. What does a jet actually cost per day if you never even fly it? Somewhere north of $5,000, whether you're on board or asleep in your own bed. Now we get to the question that actually matters. Where does the real value come from? Because the honest answer for most owners isn't cash flow. It's what the tax code lets you do with the asset. In 2025, federal law permanently restored 100% bonus depreciation on business aircraft. That means a company that buys a $20 million jet and puts it into service this year can deduct the entire $20 million against taxable income in year 1, instead of spreading it across a decade. Weak explanation: jets get tax benefits. Correct explanation: a business earning $20 million in taxable profit this year can point a jet purchase directly at that liability and erase it. The same year, on paper, as long as the aircraft passes the 50% business use test the IRS checks every single year, not just once. Miss that threshold in year 4 and the IRS claws back the difference as ordinary income, a bill that can run into the millions. This is also where the flywheel kicks in. A founder buys the jet. The jet buys back hours, no airport security, no layovers, meetings in 3 cities in a day instead of 1. Those meetings close acquisitions. The acquisitions build a bigger company. The bigger company throws off more cash flow. And eventually that cash flow buys the next asset entirely. The object is rarely the investment. The mechanism underneath it is. Because here's what nobody tells you about buying a jet. You're not buying an aircraft. You're buying a stack. Time, first. Hours back that would otherwise vanish into commercial layovers. Privacy, because a cabin with 4 seats has no other passengers overhearing a negotiation. Flexibility, the ability to leave when the deal is done, not when the schedule allows. Deal efficiency, since 3 cities in a day is a real, repeatable advantage over a competitor stuck flying coach. Security, especially for founders whose faces are recognizable. And status, which everyone assumes is the whole stack when it's really just the layer that shows. Of everything in that list, the layer most owners actually pay for, whether they admit it or not, is time. That single word carries the rest of this story. Every part of private aviation exists to protect one number: your calendar. The cabin layouts, the ground transportation coordinated to the minute, the crew scheduling software that reroutes a flight before you've even asked. All of it is engineered around a single metric the industry calls dispatch reliability, meaning how often the jet is ready the instant you are. Underneath that is a psychological mechanism. Once an owner experiences a calendar with no wasted hours, going back to commercial feels like a demotion, and that feeling is what keeps people paying six-figure crew salaries long after the productivity math stops making obvious sense. And underneath that sits a data layer few owners think about. The IRS requires exhaustive personal versus business flight logs, using a formula called the standard industry fare level, and every hour is tracked, because the entire tax advantage collapses the moment the paperwork doesn't hold up. Every hangar, every crew member, every routing decision in this industry exists to protect one of two numbers: how fast you move, or how cleanly that speed can be justified on a tax return. Two owners show what happens on either side of that math. In the early 1950s, a small-town retailer named Sam Walton bought a second-hand plane because driving 8 hours between stores in rural Arkansas was killing his business before it could grow. He taught himself to fly, then logged upward of 200,000 miles a year scouting locations from the air, picking sites nobody else had noticed because nobody else could see the traffic patterns from 3,000 feet. One store chosen from that aerial scouting, near Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, grossed $2 million in its first year alone. That habit, repeated for 3 decades, helped build the largest retailer on Earth. For Walton, the plane wasn't a status object. It was the delivery mechanism for an entire empire. Now the other side. In November 2008, the CEOs of General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler flew private jets into Washington to ask Congress for $25 billion in emergency loans. GM's chief executive, Rick Wagoner, flew in on a jet the company had valued around $36 million, at a cost of roughly $20,000 for the round trip, while coach seats on the same route sold for under $300. A lawmaker told the executives it looked like showing up to a soup kitchen in a tuxedo. When another asked how many of them had flown commercial, not one hand went up. Congress stalled the loan vote that same week. 7 months later, General Motors filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, the largest industrial bankruptcy in American history. The jet itself didn't cause the collapse, but it became the single image that told the public exactly how disconnected the company's leadership had become from the business it was failing to save. But private aviation does have one real, structural problem, and it isn't fuel prices or pilot shortages. It's the 50% business use test, applied every single year the aircraft is owned, not once at purchase. Tax rules change. Audits increase. The IRS opened a dedicated enforcement campaign targeting corporate jet users in 2024 specifically because so many owners were quietly failing that test. Fall below the threshold in any year and the accelerated depreciation you already claimed gets recaptured as ordinary income, sometimes years after the fact, at a scale that can rival the original purchase price. That's the weight, that's legal question flipped on its head. The same generous law that hands you a full write-off in year 1 can just as legally take it back in year 4. Myth: a private jet is a toy rich people buy because money means nothing to them. Reality: for a genuine share of owners, it's closer to a financial instrument with wings, run by accountants who track flight hours the way a hedge fund tracks basis points. And that's exactly why a meaningful share of billionaires who could pay cash for a G700 tomorrow simply don't. The depreciation, the 50% effective payroll, the audit exposure, none of that disappears just because you can afford it. Instead, most high-flying professionals default to fractional ownership through operators like NetJets, buying a 16th share of an aircraft for a few $100,000 and a monthly fee, or to on-demand charter entirely, paying $8,000 to $15,000 an hour only when the plane actually flies. If what you're really buying is time, ownership is rarely the cheapest way to buy it. So let's do the real math. Say you buy a used mid-size jet for $10 million and fly it 200 hours a year for genuine business travel. Scenario 1. The optimistic case. $10 million in bonus depreciation wipes out $10 million of taxable income in year 1. Annual operating costs run $1.8 million. The productivity gain from faster deal cycles is difficult to price precisely, but call it worth $2 million a year in closed business the owner wouldn't otherwise have closed. Net position: strongly positive, and that's before counting the tax shield. Scenario 2. The realistic case. Flight hours dropped to 130 because 2 acquisitions fell through. An unscheduled engine inspection adds $400,000. Insurance renews 18% higher after a soft market correction. The IRS flags the business use percentage as borderline, forcing an amended filing and a 6-figure legal bill to defend the original deduction. Operating costs ballooned to $2.6 million against a shrinking base of actual business flying. And yes, that was still the optimistic version of the bad year. The difference between the two scenarios isn't the plane. It's utilization, discipline, and whether the paperwork survives an audit. Eventually, every owner exits. Some trade in through a broker toward a newer airframe. Some sell into the pre-owned market, where clean maintenance records alone can add over $1 million to resale value. Some fold the aircraft into an estate, passing it to heirs alongside the holding company that owns it. What almost none of them do is keep flying the same jet forever. What is the owner actually buying underneath all of it? Not speed. Not the cabin. Time, specifically, the ability to compress a decade of calendar-bound growth into half that, by refusing to let travel be the bottleneck on ambition. That's the layer from the stack that survives every other explanation. Here's the paradox in one sentence. The jet that looks like the reward for winning is usually the tool that lets someone keep winning after everyone else stopped to rest. If you use it right, it disappears into the background of a bigger company. If you buy it for the wrong reason, it becomes the photograph that ends a career. Elon Musk's flight logs alone, tracked obsessively by outside observers, show a man who has spent more hours in the air in a single year than most pilots log in a decade. The ceiling of what this asset can do for someone who never stops moving.